When Danny Ainge announced his retirement in June of 2021 as the head of basketball operations of the Boston Celtics, after a disappointing season in which the Celtics, who were once thought as the next up-and-coming team with a bright future ahead of them, most were shocked to learn when Ainge made the decision to step down and name then head coach of the Celtics, Brad Stevens, as his replacement. After serving near 18 years in the Boston Celtics organization as an executive, it was hard to imagine that such a prominent figure in the basketball community, both in terms of his playing days and years spent in the front office, that he would walk away from the game forever. Well, it didn't take long for Danny Ainge to come out of retirement, as just 7 months after leaving the Boston Celtics, it was announced that he would be taking on the role as CEO of basketball operations for the Utah Jazz. And of course, right away, deep down, most knew that, just like Ainge had done with the Celtics during his tenure in the front office, his goal would ultimately be to tear down what the previous regime had put together and make this team his own. And while he kept the team intact for the half season in which he assumed the role as the team's executive, it didn't take long after another disappointing early playoff exit from the Jazz for Ainge to blow up the roster in the offseason, tearing everything down, complete with blockbuster trades and shipping out their best players and rebuilding for the future. Or so we thought. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, consider subscribing, as this is a brand new channel, and in return I'll be providing NBA content like this all season long. Now, it wasn't a surprise going into the offseason that the Jazz were likely going to be moving on from Rudy Gobert. Trade rumors surrounding Gobert have been swirling, dating all the way back to the trade deadline, and with another lackluster performance from Gobert in the playoffs, the writing was all but on the wall that he was going to be moved to another team. But what was a shock was when Jazz head coach Quinn Snyder stepped down and resigned on June 5th before the offseason could officially begin. Ainge in the front office pleaded with Snyder to stay on, promising for change under a new regime, but his decision had been made. He would not be returning as the Jazz head coach after serving 8 years at the helm. This would be the first domino in the massive overhaul of the Jazz roster. Rudy Gobert would ultimately get traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves in what is arguably the biggest trade heist of the last decade in the NBA, as the Jazz were somehow able to move off from Rudy Gobert, a 30-year-old on a max contract, 4 first-round picks, 3 of which are unprotected. Walker Kessler, who would essentially make it 5 first-round picks in the deal, as he had just been drafted by the Wolves days before the trade, and more or less salary filler from the Wolves. That's what they received in return for Rudy Gobert, as if the league hadn't learned their lesson the first time around when Danny Ainge pulled off his first fleecing, in which he traded a past prime Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to the Nets for multiple unprotected first-round picks, which would eventually turn into Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and another pick that they would use as part of the deal to land Kyrie Irving from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, after the Jazz had moved on from Gobert and acquired a stack of picks in the process, it was believed that they were now going to be building for the future around Donovan Mitchell, who was much younger than Gobert, a star player in his own right, but that quickly changed when Danny Ainge, yet again in the same offseason, pulled off yet another insane trade to keep adding to his pile of draft picks, trading Donovan Mitchell to the Cavs in exchange for Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, both young players who have not yet entered their primes, Ochai Agbaji, who the Cavs had just selected with the 14th overall pick in the 2022 draft, and 3 unprotected first-round picks along with 2 pick swaps. Danny Ainge had somehow managed to trade Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell for effectively 9 first-round picks, which doesn't even factor in the pick swaps, which will give them the option to swap picks if it's favorable to them in those years. Don't get me wrong, Donovan Mitchell has been balling out for the Cavs and has made that Cleveland team legit and a force to be reckoned with in the Eastern Conference. And even though the Wolves haven't gotten off to the start that they had wanted, I'm one of the few people who actually appreciates Rudy Gobert's game and still thinks he's one of the top big men in the league. But the fact that the Jazz were able to acquire so much draft capital and young players like Sexton, Markkanen, and Jared Vanderbilt for not even superstar level players is insane. Of course, the Jazz would later on, right before the start of the season, trade Bogdanovich as he no longer fit their timeline. It was thought that guys like Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley would also be moved as well, but for now they still remain with the team. But even despite keeping some of their veteran players who were on expiring deals, it was abundantly clear what Danny Ainge was doing, aside from just building draft picks for the future for the franchise. It was that the Utah Jazz would be one of the top teams in the tank for Wembayama sweepstakes, a team that lost their star players, brought in a bunch of young players, and had no intention on winning now. this team on paper was going to be losing a lot of games to increase their odds at landing possibly the biggest prospect of this generation. Until they didn't. You see, prior to the start of the season, most preseason rankings from the major media pundits had the Jazz anywhere from 27th to finishing dead last in the NBA. Their Vegas over and under in wins for the season was set at 23.5, and their title odds were at plus 100,000. Most were already giving them the highest odds to land the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft. And when the season began, the Jazz opened it up by beating the Denver Nuggets, a team that was thought to be one of the top Western Conference teams now that they were fully healthy. So, okay, maybe a bad loss for the Nuggets, shaking off some early season rust. Then they beat the Timberwolves, then the Pelicans, 2 playoff teams. Then they beat the Grizzlies twice. The Lakers twice, which, okay, maybe those aren't as impressive given the fact that the Lakers are an absolute dumpster fire, but they beat the Clippers, the Hawks, and winning most of these games on the road. The Jazz quickly went from being thought as one of the worst teams in the league to now being the best team in the Western Conference. So what happened? How are they doing this? Well, it starts with the resurgence of Lauri Markkanen, who the Jazz acquired in that trade package from the Cavs. Some thought Markkanen was even considered to be salary filler in this deal and that the real prize was all the draft picks they obtained for Donovan Mitchell. But thus far, Markkanen, the former number 7 overall pick who showed tons of potential in his first 2 seasons with the Chicago Bulls, has started to emerge as a star. The star that a lot of Bulls fans were hoping that he would eventually become. Markkanen, who is arguably the best player on the Jazz, is not only playing some of his best basketball, he's doing so on a winning team and being a big piece for why they're winning. Markkanen is shooting high efficiency on 53% on the highest volume of his career and rebounding the ball aggressively again, while those numbers started to tail off in his past few seasons. He's also become an effective playmaker in the post, putting up the highest assist numbers of his career, and he's even improved his overall defense, which was always the biggest knock on Markkanen previously. This has been by far and away his highest player efficiency rating of his career, and more importantly, Markkanen just seems to be very happy and content with the role he has found himself in Utah. As a Bulls fan, the guy almost looks unrecognizable with the level of aggression and confidence he is playing with. But it's not even just about Markkanen. Jordan Clarkson, the former 6th man of the year who had somewhat of a down season last year, especially as it relates to his shooting, not only has he improved upon his shooting and he's having one of the most efficient seasons of his career, especially shooting from 3 at over 41% on near 8 attempts per game, Clarkson has somehow discovered his ability to be an effective playmaker. For a guy who has never been known for his passing, would put up these insane scoring clinics but would finish the game with 0 assists, he's been such a good floor general for the Jazz and also being a veteran leader for that young squad, averaging over 5 assists per game compared to 2.5 assists over the last 2 seasons. The same goes for Mike Conley, another veteran leader, all-star last season, their starting point guard, 7th in the league in assists. He's always been one of the more underrated point guards in the NBA, and Conley has really been the glue that brings this team together, making the guys around him better, slowing things down, and making the right plays in clutch moments. Like, as good as Markkanen has been, he wouldn't be shining as much if it wasn't for Mike Conley. Kelly Olynyk has been oddly good for this team. Walker Kessler, the rookie they got from the Wolves, and the Gobert trade has been really good for them in the limited minutes he's played. Jared Vanderbilt, who they also acquired in a trade, has been very solid. The Jazz, despite not having a true bona fide star on their team, have somehow managed to be 1st in the league in points per game, 4th in overall offense measured by offensive rating, 11th on defense, 4th in net rating, and honestly, above all of this, above all the numbers, both from an individual player level and as a team overall, the biggest distinguishing factor for the Utah Jazz and the reason for their early success is that they actually play team basketball. They play well as a team, and the guys look like they're actually having fun together out there as a team. It is so much easier to just go out and have fun when there are such little expectations placed upon you. And for a lot of these guys, all of the guys that were moved to this team in the various trades, they have major chips on their shoulders. Markkanen said it in his interview with Shams Charania that everyone is expecting us to lose. And so when we win, it just adds more fuel to keep proving everyone wrong. The Jazz have very few egos to manage, no locker room problems, guys aren't worried about contracts, they just come out and compete, and they have slowly become this Cinderella story early in the season that could be on their way to the playoffs. Again, it's very early, and this could just be the case of an early season success story, but if you're a Jazz fan, you have to be very surprised and encouraged what you have seen thus far, not just for this season, but also for the future with the amount of draft picks the team is sitting on. This probably wasn't what Danny Ainge was expecting or envisioning when going into the season. I'm sure part of him wishes the team was just really bad to get a chance at Wembayama, but seeing how this team has developed and continues to improve has to have him excited after effectively rebuilding this team from scratch. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next one.